The political temperature in the BVI is past boiling point. The seen and unseen machinations have been given the thumbs up by some, causes angst for others, and leaves uncertainty in some quarters. Now, to examine what are the associated hot button issues, we have social commentator and talk show host Claude Skelton Klein joining us. Welcome to The Big Story, Mr. Klein.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with one of the hottest developments as it pertains to the governor. The governor's tenure in the BVI has been a mixed one. He's caused quite some trouble for the premier and his administration, and the latest one involves a stalemate with the House Speaker over whether or not the swearing-in ceremony for the incoming governor can be held at the House of Assembly. What's your take on that spat, and what is it symptomatic of?
Yeah, well, I think it's much to do about nothing. That being said, though, however, there are separation of powers. You know, there's the executive branch, so to speak, the legislative and the judicial branch. On the matter of where the incoming governor is sworn in, the legislature, the House of Assembly, is a house that the governor has to be invited to. The governor, per our Constitution, has no jurisdiction when it comes to the legislative body and the House of Assembly. That's why the mace, which represents the presence of the Queen, is affixed to the desk where the Speaker sits. And so in this case, she singularly is in charge and in fact and in Constitution represents Her Majesty. And it is her call, her determination, I suspect, in caucus with the government that sits, that determines who is invited to their house. It is their house. And so the governor and the office of the governor cannot command them to do anything. They can make a request, and constitutionally the Speaker of the House has a right to determine whether or not a particular request will be granted.
Now, let me just follow up here. Now, the tenure of the governor. Now, there is widespread speculation as to what his agenda is, and if it's an agenda that's all about re-exerting some sort of direct rule over the BVI. And then there's the incoming governor, and there's no certainty as to where he will pick up from where this governor let off. What's your take on the governor's tenure, that is Governor Duncan, now that he's about to depart the territory?
Yeah, let's be clear. I think it was just last night was the official closing ceremony, yes, of his time. And it is clear that the office of the governor, again per the Constitution, represents Her Majesty. So any governor, that office, no matter who the personality is, that sits in that chair represents Her Majesty. And to the extent that they think that there's some overreach or whatever the case may be, then they act accordingly. This particular governor, I'm on the record as stating that there's been some tremendous overreach of his authority. There's been some bullying posture that I have observed, and we just have to follow the decisions that are being made. The one that fled up the most, you know, is when he reached into the Treasury and used his reserve power, when you in fact sit on a weekly basis with the National Security Council, of which, according to the Constitution, is a shared responsibility. We're not pre-2007, and so it seems like to me that could have been handled quite differently, rather than emasculating our premier and therefore the government and therefore us as a people. So my critique of that is not whether or not you have the power to do something, but is that the most expedient? Is that the wisest way in which you go about doing it? So I've been quite concerned about that kind of overreach, that kind of a bullying. And when we look at the dossier, at least as what has been provided to us, of the incumbent governor, there's no real experience in governance. Most of his experience is in intelligentsia, intel gathering, which begs to question, because the fact of the matter is, if you look at his dossier, he's more suited to be the commissioner of police than he is to be the governor. So it raises more questions than it answers, and we at this point, as the people of this jurisdiction, cannot take our eyes off of this ball.
And not taking your eyes off of what's going on, I think it would be safe to say, starting with striking a position by not acceding to the request or the demand of the deputy governor to have him sworn in the House of Assembly in the manner in which it is being done, planned before, and then bring to the House of Assembly. Another thing that I would love to hear you comment on is that in addressing this whole issue of who should be the person in charge of leading the way in terms of the swearing in, the deputy governor had made it clear in her letter that the speaker or the legislative house doesn't have the full authority or exclusive authority when it comes to passing legislations. That to me shed a light as to wanting to go to another direction or sending a message.
Yeah, I you know, it's very difficult to speak intelligently on a matter and to hear from persons speak on a matter when in fact you have the AG's office and attorneys, as a matter of fact, persons who have helped in crafting and creating and interpreting the Constitution. It always seems best to me to defer to those persons for proper interpretation of the Constitution, rather than us creating a fight amongst each other, because we're on the same team. You know, and so it seems like to me, strategically, we need to determine, not because you have the right to do something, I mean you should do it. What is in the strategic interest of these BVI in relationship to the UK, who happens to be the mother country? We have to find, while we are asserting our right to do things and while we are asserting our own determination to do things, it's in collaboration with an authority and a power that we are still a part of. So to that extent, I think wisdom needs to prevail. We ought not get into some kind of ego and macho type fight that does not help us to reach our ultimate goal. And what we want for our ultimate goal is the advancement of our people, both economically and politically. So I will call upon all the persons who now hold the seats to say, listen, let's put pause in a minute. Let's pause. What is in the best interest? What is strategically in our best interest? Not immediately, but ultimately. That's the question that needs to be posed.
And following on that, especially with the continued swirling of the constitutional reform talks, what do you think is in the best interest for the territory in that long-term strategy? Is it devolution or is it outright independence? Is the territory ready for that as yet?
Yeah, well, I believe in self-determination. I'm a nationalistic person. I am not against anybody. I am pro-Virgin Islander. And so there needs to be a vision cast that puts us on a path of self-determination and ultimately independence. So whether it's a 2025 vision, a 2030 vision, it needs to be cast, it needs to be crafted. There needs to be a plan in which we go through the territory, helping to educate and re-educate and put in place the systems and structures, strengthening the existing ones, adding to what needs to be added, so we in fact, when we arrive at our desired destination, we are in fact ready to do what has to be done. And listen, the best way for us to deal with and or relate to the UK is first to do what we ought to do. We ought not give the governor or anyone else an opportunity to use against us that we're not doing A, B, or C. We're not holding our PAC meetings. We're not holding our registry meetings. I mean, those are things that you just ought to do. irregardless of who is watching or who is not. So the best way to combat, one of the best ways in which to combat what we see taking place is for Virgin Islanders, the persons that we have elected as fiduciaries for this territory, is to begin to ensure that what we are supposed to abide by constitutionally and or by policy that we've agreed to, that we are in fact following that.
And it seems to be the very opinion of many that to get to that stage that you're talking about, it's very important for the Premier, as most persons would say, awake.
Yes.
How do you share your views as it relates to the stance the Premier has been taking or not taking to get to that position that you were alluding to?
Yeah, well first of all, let me back up. I'm going to come to your point. On the matter of independence, independence is a word that they have even cowed us in wanting to speak publicly. Independency simply means we want to be able to determine our own destiny. Simple. That's all it is. The Brexit vote, you know, the so-called elitists had one construct, but the man and the woman on the ground says, no, we want to go a different direction. We do not want to be governed from Brussels. We want to be governed from London. And they asserted their right. So let's be clear on that. And watch this. It didn't matter to them what the consequences were, what the implications were. This is what we want. Now you all go figure it out. So let's be clear on that. Now, one of the tags for our Premier is that most of the cartoons that we see, we have him asleep. And while, you know, we poke fun at that, in order to raise the greater truth, there is a sense in which our government, because they have collective responsibility, and our Premier, a man who I stood on the stage with and said, this is the man and this is the team, there is a sense in which we have fallen completely asleep. And it begs to question, why is this happening? How is it that these are not the men and women that I know? There's something that's happened. Have leadership been compromised in some way? What is it? And we do not yet know, but I think that we will ultimately know, that has gone wrong, that have kind of lulled this government to sleep, and therefore have allowed persons to usurp authority and power, whereas they should not have been. So it raises tremendous concern. I'll go a step further and say this. I believe that the Honorable Dr. D. Orlando Smith, who has served this territory for some years, first as a medical doctor, came back one of the young and brightest and sharpest surgeons that we've ever seen, who have made his contribution to our foreparents, our grandfathers and our grandmothers, who were only charging $5 and sometimes charging nothing when other doctors who came on the scene continued to rate. This man has paid his dues, has been a virtuous man, a man of integrity, of decency and fairness. That's the Orlando Smith that we know. And for the time that he served, he was the man for that time. What has happened to us, particularly in the last 3 years, there has been a tremendous acceleration of change and challenge. And I believe that given the new changes and challenges that is happening so rapidly, it requires a different kind of leadership and a different skill set. So I think we are at the stage where I hope this government can live out its 2 years. I don't know that that will be the case. It really concerns me. I hope that they can. But where we celebrate, where we honor Dr. D. Orlando Smith, thank him for the service, the contribution that he has made, and transition leadership. I think one of the things that we ought to do, that Peebles Hospital, I think one of the things that we ought to do, ought not be the only thing, but that hospital needs to be named in his honor.
Yeah, that sentiment was expressed before.
It was.
Yes.
And since they have the power, the Honorable Ronnie W. Skelton, the thing about power, the highest use of power is to empower. And Bill Clinton says there's 2 times you don't use power: before you get it and after you lose it. When you are in power, that's when you need to do what needs to be done. And that's one of the things I will be, well, this is the first time I'm actually saying it publicly, but one of the things that I will advocate in helping and assisting in this transition and honoring one of our heroes, because that's who he is to name that hospital after him. But I think as it relates to leadership and premiership, and certainly as Minister of Finance, that sun has set, and we need some new rising suns.
Mr. Klein, this is the perfect point at which we can take a break, because we definitely want to delve more into the capabilities of the Premier and his party to take this country forward.
Sure.
You're watching The Big Story. Stay with us. We'll be right back.